An established wealthy family took custody of my young son following the death of my husband, leaving me with only monthly visits to see him. But there is a hope. In the soft glow of the early morning, Justine sat alone at the kitchen table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of a half-empty coffee cup. The house was silent, a stark contrast to the bustling warmth it used to emanate. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral, 3 weeks since Hector had been cruelly snatched away by fate's indifferent hand, leaving behind a void that seemed to consume everything around her. Justine's gaze drifted to the small, framed photo on the mantel, Hector, with his easy smile and eyes that always seemed to hold a secret joke. They had built a modest but happy life together, their love a steady flame that had weathered many storms. But this storm was different. It had extinguished that flame, leaving Justine to navigate a dark, unfamiliar path alone. The sound of light footsteps broke her reverie. It was Lucas, their 8-year-old son, his hair tousled from sleep, clutching a threadbare teddy bear Hector had won for him at a carnival. Justine forced a smile, masking her sorrow. "Morning, sunshine," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "Morning, Mom," Lucas mumbled, rubbing his eyes. He climbed onto the chair next to her, his presence a bittersweet reminder of what they had lost and what she still had to fight for. They went through the motions of breakfast, a routine that felt hollow without Hector's laughter filling the room. Justine kept up a brave front, chattering about trivial things, but her heart wasn't in it. Lucas seemed to sense her distress, his young face etched with a confusion and sadness far beyond his years. After breakfast, as Lucas settled in front of the TV, Justine retreated to the solitude of her bedroom. The room still bore Hector's imprint, his books on the nightstand, his watch on the dresser. She picked it up, feeling its weight, a tangible reminder of the life they had shared. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back. She had to be strong for Lucas. The doorbell rang, slicing through the heavy silence. Justine composed herself and went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a man and a woman, dressed in expensive suits, their faces somber. They introduced themselves as representatives of the Delacroix family, Hector's family. Justine felt a surge of resentment. The Delacroix were wealthy, influential people, the kind who lived in a world far removed from her own. Hector had been estranged from them for years. His decision to marry a woman of modest means a point of contention that had never been resolved. "We're here about Lucas," the woman said, her tone polite but distant. "We believe it's in his best interest to come live with us. We can provide opportunities you cannot." Justine's heart pounded in her chest. This was what she had feared since Hector's passing, that his family would come for Lucas. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Lucas is my son. He stays with me." The representatives exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "We hope to settle this amicably, Mrs. Delacroix. But if you refuse, we're prepared to take legal action." As they left, Justine closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. She knew she was no match for the Delacroix family's wealth and power. But Lucas was all she had left of Hector, and she would fight with every breath in her body to keep him. The days following the Delacroix' visit were a blur for Justine. Her mind was a tumult of fear and defiance, a constant replay of their cold words. They wanted Lucas, her little boy, her last connection to Hector. She couldn't let that happen. Justine knew she was David facing Goliath. The Delacroix had resources she couldn't dream of. But she had something stronger, a mother's love, and the memory of Hector's unwavering belief in standing for what was right. She sought legal counsel, though her options were limited. The lawyer she could afford was sympathetic but realistic. "I won't lie to you, Justine. This will be tough. They have money, influence. But I promise to do everything I can," he said, his eyes kind but worried. Meanwhile, life had to go on. Justine juggled her job at the local library with caring for Lucas, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Each evening, she would sit with Lucas, helping him with his homework, reading stories, or just talking. She noticed the change in him. The once lively and chatty boy was now quiet, his moments of joy fewer. The court date loomed like a dark cloud. Justine prepared as best as she could, gathering every piece of evidence and testimony that showcased her loving, stable home. Friends and colleagues wrote letters of support, speaking to her character and her devotion to Lucas. On the day of the hearing, Justine felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but smart dress, a world away from the expensive suits of the Delacroix legal team. The courtroom was intimidating, the air thick with tension. The Delacroix were there, their faces masks of polite indifference. Justine caught a glimpse of Lucas, brought in by a social worker. He looked small and scared. Her heart ached. The proceedings were a blur. The Delacroix lawyers painted a picture of a world where Lucas would have the best of everything: education, opportunities, a life of privilege. They questioned Justine's ability to provide for Lucas, subtly hinting at her modest income and single-parent status. When it was her turn, Justine spoke from the heart. She talked about Lucas, their life together, the love and stability she provided. She spoke of Hector, their shared dreams for their son. Her voice wavered but didn't break. As the judge announced a recess before the verdict, Justine felt drained. She had given it her all, but was it enough against the might of the Delacroix? Back at home, waiting for the call, Justine held Lucas close, reading his favorite book until he fell asleep in her arms. She watched him sleep, his face peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her heart. The phone rang late in the evening. It was her lawyer. The verdict was in. Her heart sank as she listened. Despite her best efforts, the court had ruled in favor of the Delacroix. Custody of Lucas would be transferred to them. The world seemed to spin around her. She had lost. Lost the legal battle, lost Hector, and now she was losing Lucas. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would keep fighting, in any way she could. Lucas was her son, and she would never let go without a fight. The days following the court's decision were a nightmare for Justine. Her house, once filled with the sounds of Lucas's laughter and chatter, felt hauntingly silent. Each corner echoed memories of a life that was being ripped away from her. The legal battle had drained her, both emotionally and financially, but it was the loss of Lucas that was unbearable. Justine's friends and family rallied around her, offering support and comfort, but their words were mere whispers in the storm of her grief. She felt a profound sense of injustice. How could a system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable wrench a child away from a loving mother based solely on financial status? The day Lucas was to leave with the Delacroix arrived too soon. Justine tried to be brave, to smile for Lucas, but her heart was shattering. She packed his things, each item a reminder of the life they shared. His favorite books, the photo album filled with pictures of him and Hector, his little backpack. She slipped a small toy Hector had given him into the bag, a silent message to her son to remember his father and the love they all shared. Lucas was quiet, his young face etched with confusion and sadness. Justine knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. "You are the strongest, bravest boy I know," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Remember, no matter what, Mommy loves you more than anything in the world. And Daddy is watching over us, always. The Delacroix arrived, their car a sleek symbol of the world they belonged to. They were polite, their smiles practiced. Justine couldn't bring herself to trust those smiles. She held Lucas tightly one last time, whispering words of love and courage, then handed him over to his new guardians. Watching the car drive away, a piece of Justine's soul went with it. She stood there long after the car had disappeared, lost in her grief. In the weeks that followed, Justine tried to reach out to Lucas. The Delacroix allowed her phone calls, but they were brief and monitored. Lucas's voice was always hesitant, his lively spirit dimmed. Justine ached to hold him, to tell him everything would be all right, but she couldn't. She fought through her days, her job at the library a welcome distraction, but the nights were long and lonely. Justine lay awake, replaying every moment of the court case, wondering if there was something more she could have done. As the 1-month mark approached, Justine prepared for her first visit with Lucas. The court had granted her 1 day a month with him. It was a small consolation, a mere drop in the ocean of her loss, but she clung to it. The day of the visit, Justine arrived early at the designated meeting place, a sterile room in a government building. Her heart raced as she waited. When Lucas finally walked in, escorted by a social worker, he looked different, his clothes more formal, his hair neatly combed. But his smile, when he saw her, was the same. They spent the day together, playing games and talking. Lucas spoke of his new life, his words careful. Justine listened, her heart aching. She could sense the change in him, the subtle molding of his personality to fit into the Delacroix world. As the day ended, and she hugged Lucas goodbye, promising to see him next month, Justine felt a renewed determination. She might have lost the legal battle, but she would not lose her son. Not truly. She would fight in every way she could to remain a part of his life, to remind him of the love they shared, a love no court ruling could ever diminish. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Each day was a reminder of the void that Lucas's absence had left in Justine's life. She maintained a brave front at work and in public, but in the solitude of her home, her grief was palpable, a constant companion in the echoing silence. Justine found herself in a routine that was both a comfort and a curse. Work at the library offered a semblance of normality, but returning home to an empty house was a daily struggle. The photographs of Lucas and Hector, which once brought joy, now served as a stark reminder of her loss. She would often find herself lost in these memories, the laughter and love they shared playing like a movie in her mind. Her monthly visits with Lucas were both her lifeline and her heartache. She would count down the days, preparing for each visit with a mix of eagerness and dread. The meetings were bittersweet, a few precious hours in which she could hold her son, talk to him, and try to bridge the growing gap in their lives. Lucas was changing. Each visit, Justine noticed subtle differences, the way he spoke, his mannerisms, even his interests. The Delacroix influence was evident, molding him into a version of themselves. It pained Justine to see these changes, yet she couldn't deny the advantages he was receiving: the best schools, extracurricular activities, and travels to places she could only dream of showing him. Despite this, their bond remained strong. Lucas would light up during their visits, his laughter and energy filling the room. They would play games, read books, and Justine would listen intently as he shared stories about his new life. She treasured these moments, holding on to them long after Lucas had left. But the reality of their situation was never far from her mind. The Delacroix were courteous but distant during the exchanges, always reminding Justine of her limited role in her son's life now. They had set boundaries, and she was painfully aware of the consequences should she overstep them. The emotional toll was immense. Justine often found herself at Hector's grave, talking to him about their son, seeking solace in the memories of their time together. She wondered what Hector would say, how he would feel about the life Lucas was being forced into. She missed his guidance, his strength, and most of all, his understanding. Her friends and family remained supportive, encouraging her to keep fighting. But Justine's fight was no longer in the courtroom, it was in maintaining her connection with Lucas, ensuring he never forgot where he came from, the love they shared, and the father who would always be a part of him. In the quiet moments alone, Justine would plan for the next visit, each one a small victory in the battle she was waging. She held on to hope, however faint, that one day things might change, that she could once again be a full-time mother to her son. But for now, she lived for those monthly visits, each one a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost and what she still had to hold on to. Her love for Lucas was unwavering, a beacon in the darkness, guiding her through each day until she could see him again. Months turned into years, and the once painful routine of monthly visits became a bittersweet normalcy in Justine's life. Each visit with Lucas was a day she cherished, a brief respite in the otherwise relentless march of days. She watched Lucas grow from a boy into a young man, his features maturing, his personality shaped by a world so different from the one she could have given him. On the eve of what would have been Lucas's 10th visit since the court's decision, Justine found herself restless. She sat in Lucas's old room, now a shrine to his childhood, untouched since he left. The walls adorned with superhero posters, a shelf filled with an array of toys and books they used to read together, and his drawings still pinned to the corkboard. It was a capsule of memories, both painful and precious. The next day, Justine waited at the usual government building, her heart pounding with the familiar mix of excitement and anxiety. When Lucas arrived, she barely recognized him. Gone was the little boy with wide, curious eyes. In his place stood a young teenager, tall and poised, his mannerisms refined. Despite this, his smile when he saw her was the same, lighting up his face with genuine warmth. Their conversations had evolved over the years. No longer about toys and cartoons, they now spoke about Lucas's school, his friends, and his aspirations. He talked about his travels with the Delacroix, the places he had seen, and the experiences he had. Justine listened, a proud but aching heart, happy for his opportunities but saddened by the shared moments they had lost. During their lunch, Lucas's demeanor shifted. He seemed hesitant, as if wrestling with a thought. Finally, he looked up at Justine, his eyes holding a seriousness beyond his years. "Mom," he started, his voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately. About you. About who I am." Justine's heart skipped a beat. "Lucas, you can talk to me about anything, you know that." "I know," he said, fidgeting with his napkin. "It's just, sometimes, I feel like I don't belong there, with the Delacroix. I mean, they're nice and all, but it's not home." The words hit Justine like a wave. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she fought them back. "Lucas, you'll always have a home with me. No matter what, you are my son, and you are your father's son. We may not have their wealth, but we have something no money can buy. We have love, our memories, our bond." Lucas nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I know, Mom. It's just hard, you know? I wish things were different." Justine reached across the table, taking his hand. I know, my love. But remember, no matter where you are, what you're doing, we're always connected. You're not alone. Their day together passed too quickly, as it always did. As she hugged Lucas goodbye, she whispered, "You have the best of both worlds in you, Lucas. Never forget that." Lucas hugged her back tightly. "I won't, Mom. I love you." As Justine watched him leave, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Their bond, tested and strained, had not broken. It had evolved, grown stronger in its own way. She knew their journey was far from over, but as long as they had their love, they would endure whatever came their way. She looked forward to their next visit, and the many more to come, holding on to the belief that one day, they could be together again, not just as mother and son, but as a family.